What is up, you guys? Thank you so much for tuning in with me. So I have several projects that I have to work on today, one of which being planting some bush beans. So our tomato plants are in the ground and they're growing pretty well. And you can see right here, I have bush beans planted on either side. So I have blue lakes on this side growing all the way down, and then I have early contenders planted on this side. And so I planted those probably about a week or two ago, maybe. I can't remember. I wrote it down when I did it. I'd have to go double check. But I'm getting ready to plant up another batch on either side here. Now the weeding has caught up with me, so I'm gonna have to weed that as well as the bed where those sprinklers are at the moment on the other side of the onions before I can plant the next batch. But these here are ready to go in. And so I'm not going to soak the beans or anything, but I am just going to, I think I'm going to put blue lakes on this side here just so I know what's over here. And then I'm going to put early contenders on this side so I know it's over here. And I'm just going to pop them in the ground here. So I have not just had a whole ton of luck with growing green beans, in all honesty. I have planted them every year, and last year was probably one of the better years. We picked like a handful of green beans, but genuinely not enough to, I think we had them as a side dish with a meal. So they're really, and that was after we mixed canned tomatoes in with them. So not a lot of green beans have been grown in success. So this year what I'm trying to do is just plant a ton of them, because I figured if I could get a handful from a row, and I got a handful from, you know, 4 rows, and that's 4 handfuls, I could at least blanch those and freeze those, or we could can them up or something like that. And that would be, you know, more substantial. Whether we ate them fresh right away or we preserved them, that would give us something a little bit more substantial. So I'm just trying to get more planted out here. The 2 varieties that I have are the early contenders and the blue lakes, and I got them from Gurney's this year just because they were the most affordably priced this year. Something that I like to do, especially when I'm planting, is whenever there's spacing, I like to just cut a stick, because a tape measure is a little bulky to run around with. And it's kind of hard to keep track of, like, because like if it's 4 inches, then you count by 4s if you just were to spread it out. So it's like 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, so on and so forth, etc. So I just like to take a stick and cut it down. So this is 4 inches, and I'm going to plant the beans 4 inches apart. And I think they go about 1.5 inches deep. So I was going to mention about the beans is that I'm not soaking them. And I've soaked beans and not soaked beans to see what would happen. And genuinely, I've not seen a difference in the beans when I've soaked them. So pretty much I just take a handful, like these are the, where are those? The early contenders. And I'll just take them. Beautiful red beans. Those are so pretty. And I'm just going to take them and I'm going to put them in the ground just like this. Some people really do recommend soaking them, and they seem to have a lot of luck with that. I just don't have good luck with that. I feel like they almost dissolve. And another thing is we have fire ants really badly. And if you don't have fire ants where you live, or red ants, some people call them. Well, we call them fire ants. I think they're more like, I think they're red ants. But anyways, if you don't have them, they really get into beans. So if you were to soak the beans, they can actually find them and they'll eat the beans. So I don't know what's up with that, but they seem to really like protein. So that is pretty interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these planted. So the idea of having green beans and tomatoes planted like that is supposed to be that the green beans put nitrogen in the soil for the tomatoes to utilize for growth, so they're really good companion plants. A lot of times if you're going to be planting corn in an area, it's a good idea to put beans there in the previous years to help put nitrogen in the soil, because beans are really because corn is a really heavy feeder. And it's kind of the same idea with tomatoes, except you can put them together and it will give them a boost of nitrogen. So we're going to see how this works. If it works really well this year, then I would love to just copy and paste for next year. So that is what I would like to do, but we're gonna see how this works. Out here, we have our vining crop. So we have our what are these called? Pumpkins, oh my goodness, pumpkins, spaghetti squash, those are some butternut squashes there. This row here, right here, this whole row is, was supposed to be cantaloupes, and they're not doing well, and I figured they wouldn't. I really struggle with cantaloupes. They just never want to grow for us. I don't know what the deal is, to be honest. I don't know. So I might try and replant. There are some in here, but it's mainly weeds and zinnias. So I might give this row away to okra or something like that. I did plant okra, and an armadillo came out the night I planted it and tilled up everything. So I don't have any okra planted, but, or I do have it still planted. I have a couple of Alabama Reds that came up, so I need to replant more okra. I planted our tomatoes probably over a month ago, maybe now, and we have had just an abnormally cool year here in Georgia. And for example, the other night it got down to 55 degrees, which, for a little bit of perspective, I just pulled our collard green plants out. They had bolted, they had gone to seed, they were covered in powdery mildew, but they never got bitter from the heat. And this happened middle towards the end of May. Last year, the collard greens were bitter, completely bolted, and ready to come out midway through March. So that is just how drastic the weather has been this year. Usually it's very, very hot, but this year it has just been very, very cold. I'm out here mulching them with grass clippings, and I have mulched with grass clippings on the tomatoes for the last couple of years, and it works really, really well on the plants. We don't use any sort of, we don't fertilize our lawn, we don't spray our lawn with anything, broadleaf herbicides. It's just lawn, and so the clippings are good to use in the garden. Some people do not like to use grass clippings because of bringing seed into the garden, which is completely understandable. The best mulch to use in your garden would be something like leaf mulch, like, you know, raking up leaves and whatnot. And we don't have a lot of trees in our yard. We do have some trees, but not enough, I feel like, to really mulch everything, and they drop all their leaves in the fall. So you put that on in the fall, it breaks down, and then in the spring you don't really have any mulch. So that is why we use our grass clippings, and they work really well. It really does help retain moisture, and the main reason I started doing it was because of disease. So I had never really mulched the tomato plants, and they would always get disease and always have these problems. And what I realized was that the plants were getting too much splashback. So what essentially will happen when it rains or when you're watering, that will that water is hitting the ground and it's splashing that dirt and that soil up onto the plants. And it can cause, and it can harbor a lot of, it is a growing environment for disease. And so when I started mulching around the base of the plants, I started not having super bad splashback. It was keeping the soil was retaining its moisture a lot better, and I just didn't have as big of a problem. The other thing I started doing was I started pruning off bottom leaves, which I did not used to do. I was always afraid to cut things off of a tomato plant, and then when I realized that it was benefiting the plants to trim on them, I didn't hold back. And there is debate as to whether or not you should prune your tomato plants. In my personal opinion, with the experience that I have at this point, is I would say, I feel like when you prune a tomato plant in a humid climate, you are less likely to get diseases than if you just let it grow wild, because when you live in a humid climate, it is a different type of heat. What I have found is people who live in like the Southwest, or if they live somewhere where the climate is very dry and they don't have a lot of that humidity, usually they can get away with not pruning their plants whatsoever. So it's kind of one of those hit or miss things. You just kind of have to experiment. I would say prune some of your plants, don't prune others, and just see what happens. However, if you are growing determinate varieties of tomatoes, a determinate variety would be a variety that produces all of its fruit at once and then dies, as where an indeterminate just keeps growing and growing and has an indeterminate amount of fruit. You're not really supposed to prune your determinate varieties, so just general rule of thumb, just don't prune those if you can help it, and prune your indeterminate. Some people prune for better production, some people prune for disease, like I prune for disease, but you just kind of have to experiment and see what happens. And also experiment with different types of mulch, because I have found that grass mulch using grass clippings has been the most effective in our garden. I feel like it suppresses the weeds, it breaks down really well, and I really haven't noticed it bringing in a lot of grass seed. Typically, I've noticed when I use this kind of using grass clippings as mulch, the grass it produces are like long bits, and I just don't see a whole lot of that out here. And you know, it's a risk I'm willing to take because it's free and it works well. And if it's free and it works well, I'm willing to pull some extra weeds. Some people really like to use the wood chips. If you can get a free chip drop. Some people like to use straw or hay. And some people really like to use, and I believe that, and you could correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe that straw is a byproduct of hay. So hay will put more grass seed in your garden and you'll have more weeds than if you use straw. So straw is better to use than hay. You can use either one. There's just a lot of options. Some people, and I've done this before, where I just throw my weeds down and they dry to a crisp and I don't pick them up in time, and then I'll just use that and throw it on top of the ground and it will act as a weed suppressant. Honestly, you just kind of have to use what works for you. And my biggest thing with anything, I'm a big believer in just experiment and see what happens. And if it works out, awesome. If it doesn't, okay, then, you know, try again, try something different, try a different method, try a different technique. But in the meantime, I can get a lot of grass clippings for free. They work really well, and that's what I like to use. So something that I would tell you when sourcing or outsourcing some type of mulch for your garden is, I would say, ask questions. Ask questions and ask about whether or not it's been sprayed with a broadleaf herbicide, whether or not you know, like if you're getting grass clippings from somebody, ask them, say, hey, do you spray your lawn? Do you spray a fertilizer on your lawn? Do you spray a broadleaf herbicide on your lawn? If you are getting hay or straw, ask them, hey, do you spray this with some sort of Grazon or something? And the reason you need to ask that question is because that can be detrimental to your plants, because it's common sense. You can't put poison on a plant and expect it to survive. You don't want to spray weed killer on your tomato plant. If you don't want to do that, then you're not going to want to put something that has that sprayed all over it on your tomato plants. That's going to be detrimental to the health of the plants, the health of your soil. So it is not worth the risk. So just ask the question, because if you ask the question and maybe you don't like the answer to the question, maybe the answer is, yeah, we do spray it with a broadleaf herbicide. And that's too bad. You're just going to have to forego that. But asking the question can be very detrimental to the health of your garden. What I always go back to is that do the best you can do with what you have, and that's good enough. Sometimes your best is going to be good enough. There's always going to be pros and cons. I think that's the biggest thing too, is there's always going to be pros and cons no matter what you use, because if you use wood chips, you're going to run the risk. Yes, it is possibly going to steal nitrogen from the soil and your plants could possibly suffer. Yes, if you are using a hay or straw, you are running the risk, if you haven't talked to the person and you're just getting it from the store, you are running the risk of having it have some sort of broadleaf herbicide or something like that on the plant. And if you're using grass clippings, you have the risk of bringing the seed into your garden or whatever. So there really is kind of like, I feel like everything has its pros and cons, and you just have to weigh them out for yourself and decide what you want to do. And don't be afraid to experiment and try different things. If you want to buy a bag of wood chips from Tractor Supply and you want to cut some grass and save it, and you want to take some weeds and let them dry and use those. But if you want to try using pine needles or, you know, whatever you want to try doing, and you want to try it in a couple different areas on a couple different spots, whatever, do that, see what works for you. I feel like so much of gardening is just experimenting. So much of gardening really is just genuinely sitting down, looking at what's in front of you and trying something. And it is a learning process that you never stop learning from gardening. Okay, you can go to school for gardening and there's still going to be so much to learn. So my thing with gardening is that no matter what route you take, no matter what direction you're going to go in, there's always something to learn. There's always something to experiment with. And there's always something that's going to draw you in. So I'm not here trying to strive for perfection in a broken food system. I am here to do the best that I can do where I'm placed and where I'm at. I'm definitely running a little bit behind this year. I don't have everything planted that I want planted. Like, I'm going to get ready to work on this corn over here because what needs to happen is making the rows, and that is always just very labor intensive, and I always get sore from making rows, but it needs to be done, and then they need to get amended, and then they can be planted. And I have the T-post watering thing is back there, so I'll need to set that up and get it watered in. Yeah, it's just one of those things. I was talking to somebody not that long ago. I didn't even have my tomatoes planted, and I was talking to him, and they're like, oh yeah, I have my everything is planted, like everything. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so they had crossed their T's, dotted their I's, checked every box. And it's really easy when you hear that kind of stuff to feel like you're running behind. But truly, like, if you're running like a little bit behind, or you're not where you want to be, it's okay. Because obviously, if you're not where you want to be, you weren't intended to be there, and it's okay to be where you're at. So there's your little bit of encouragement. It's okay if you don't have your corn planted after Memorial Day. You'll get there. Thank you so much for tuning in with me. I really do appreciate it. If you liked this video, please let me know by giving it a big thumbs up. Feel free to click that big red subscribe button if you want to stick around. And if you never, ever want to miss a brand new upload, you can click that bell icon and you'll receive notifications every time that I upload, and you will never miss one. And always feel free to drop a comment down below, because I absolutely love hearing from you all. I love hearing your thoughts. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.